Well, good afternoon to Deborah and John and Paul and Peter and Robert and Tammy and Tom and William. My name is Roger, and I'm appreciate the idea that you're willing to take time out on this presumably lovely June afternoon. I'm looking out my window. I'm not sure how lovely it's going to be in a few minutes, but that's another story, I guess. In any case, kind of an interesting topic here. You probably, well, not much when I first put this together. I just barely heard about it. And since then, every day I see something more that makes it interesting in many, many different ways. So I hope you'll find it as interesting as I do, and it's challenging, in fact. So we're going to look at data centers from three different directions here, maybe more if you want to. What I'd like to do, we're right at the kind of the borderline between where it's okay to just turn on your mic and say, "Hey, Roger, excuse me," and then if you have a question or comment, and let's try that. And as long as we can keep that manageable, that way we can kind of hear each other, and then you can keep your fingers. You don't have to busy typing and so forth. If that gets out of hand, we'll just cut off the and say, all right, fine, let's just do the chat box instead. Now, actually, we won't do the chat box though, because chat is what we save for our host in case he has any important information, like he indicated at the beginning. So if you go to the more items on your bar across the top of your screen and just go to Q&A. An alternative way is just to type in a question or a question or whatever, and I'll see that flash up, and I will get to it as soon as I can. So let's get started, and well, let's start this way. If everybody could just give a 30-second quick, tell me what is your discipline? And where are you attending from? And Deborah, could we start with you? Let's go in the alphabetical order that shows on the panel on the participant box. That would be Deborah, John, Paul, Peter, Robert, Scott, Tammy, Tom. Deborah, can you open your mic? Tell us what's your discipline and where you're joining us from. Deborah, I see your mic is open. I don't hear you. Not sure what that might be going on. How about you, John? Can you give us a try? Let's see if your audio comes in.
Yep, sure. Can you hear me?
Hear you just fine. Go ahead,
I'm John
Jim.
Matthews. I'm a consulting engineer. My office is in Cookeville, Tennessee. I've consulted on some power system problems at two data centers. So this is a great interest to me. It's good to be here today.
All right, great. I'm glad you're here. And it's especially nice to have people who are directly involved with the topic. Paul, how about you? Excuse me.
I received an audio setting that allowed me to unmute, which was not the case a minute or two ago. Hi,
Okay.
I, Paul Lubinsky coming to you from rainy and unseasonably cool Milwaukee. I work there remotely from my home for a Minneapolis, St. Paul area based employer. I am a mechanical engineer. And I now have more of a reliability and quality generalist role where perhaps most anybody from most any engineering discipline could eventually take that role. But that's what I have now. My employer uh, is possibly going to get involved much more in the temperature control systems that could be involved in applications like data centers.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Paul. Folks, if you could, just in case we might encounter echoes, it'd be good if you could stay muted until, yeah, okay, next, Tammy, I see you're unmuted. How about you?
I work for John Matthews and Associates. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm very interested in the 800-volt DC power conversion that's going on that data centers are driving.
Okay, very interesting. 800 volts. I hadn't heard that. I wonder if that's, in any case, and William, how about you? William, I see you're unmuted, but I cannot hear you. How about Victor Esteban?
Hey guys, you can hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Victor Maldonado, right? Victor Maldonado is fine. Looking for more details, more data challenges that is happening with the data centers, and having general opinions what the overall
Okay.
area for electromechanical happening.
What's your discipline, Victor? Are you
My
electrical
discipline is
mechanic?
electrical engineer,
Okay.
power systems.
Okay. And let's see, where are we? Now I lost track. How about someone who, and when somebody speaks, the names bounce up and down on my screen. So now I forgot. Now I lost track.
This is Tom Nordberg. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. I was struggling with the audio control too, but I found the microphone. Thank you. So anyway, excuse me. I'm a civil engineer. I am based in St. Paul, Minnesota. My discipline is civil, and I am interested in data centers because they need all kinds of infrastructure, and that's what I do.
Yeah, you've got some stuff going on around Buffalo, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or up in the Anoka area.
Probably. I guess I haven't kept that close a track of who's doing what here.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with Anoka. I'm a Minnesota guy myself. Good to know here you're on. And in fact, another 8 days, I'm going to be on an airplane heading for Minneapolis.
Oh, well, welcome. This is the best time of year to be in Minneapolis, of course.
Pardon me?
This is the best time of year to be in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and one of the worst times of the year being in Florida. So it's worth a double win, I guess.
Very good.
Okay, let's see. Who have we missed? Just go ahead and chime in if we missed you because my names are all mixed up now on my screen.
Hello, this is Robert Fox. I'm a recently retired fire protection / mechanical engineer, having worked with the Army Corps of Engineers and Defense Logistics Agency. And like one of your earlier persons that talked, I am now living in Cookeville, Tennessee.
Okay, great. And who else have we missed? Tammy, Scott, Robert, have we?
I didn't go yet. This is Peter. I'm a mechanical engineer. Mostly I'm taking this class just to learn more about the data centers. It's more of a curiosity thing than a profession thing. So
Okay, that's fine. We try to serve a broad menu here. So hopefully everybody will walk home knowing something they didn't know before. Okay, have we missed anybody? Okay, well then let's get started. At least we know that your microphones work and you know how to find them now. So let's still try that. If you would, at this point, if everybody could mute, simply because sometimes we get some echo problems and it's better to just remain muted until you want to speak up. So if you'll click your mute button, that would be great and much appreciated, I'm sure, by everyone. Okay, so this is a nice data center picture that Western Resource Advocates, one of the references for this presentation, had in one of their publications. If you haven't seen what they look like, this is what one of them looks like. We'll see a few more pictures as we move through here. And so we're going to be looking at both the technical, environmental, and some ethical issues. And it's pretty hard not to look at all three if you get involved in this. I started out figuring I'll just prove or whether or not we can do this all with solar, because that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years or so. I mean, I've written 5 textbooks on it. I've signed off on almost 8,000 sets of plans. And so I'm pretty familiar with solar, and I'm pretty familiar with what's out there and what can be done with this stuff. So I thought it would be kind of fun to just see whether we could power up all these solar centers that they're planning on with solar, and just let it go with that. But then I started stumbling across lots of other stuff that made it even more interesting. And it's based on basically one report. But then that report opens it up for a whole lot of other questions. So let's move on here. And I'm going to start right off with some references for you, and you'll see these, you'll be getting copies of the presentation. And I think you'll be getting PDF copies of this presentation. And if you care to use it for your own personal use, I could care less. If you use it, I'd consider that a compliment. So, and the references are there in place. I put them together, assembled them, and so forth. So this Berkeley report is a fairly long report. It's about 80 pages long, so it covers a lot of really good data. And so this is a fairly good starting point if you want to learn something about data centers, about the technical issues involved. And then we're going to start out with the technical issues. And here's another pretty good reference, because it gives a good idea of what's going on a county by county basis throughout the United States, such as Palm Beach County, Florida, and Hennepin County, Minnesota, and Tennessee, and Virginia, and places like that. So this is a pretty good reference on where the action is. Here's a good reference on what's going on in the West. Western United States, that is. And that first picture you saw was from Western Resource Advocates. And then there's our friend Eliezer Yudkowsky, who wrote a really challenging book titled "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies: Why Superhuman Artificial Intelligence Would Kill Us All." And that's a real catcher. When I saw that, I decided this is a book I'm going to buy. So I bought that thing. And I'm going to tell you, if you buy this and you want to read it, please read the last chapter first. Otherwise, you're going to get very depressed because this guy's been in the business for a long, long time, and he's got a pretty good idea of what's going on. And the scary part of it all is simply that a lot of the people who are well into the business and the development side of it, as opposed to the investment side in it, notice that there are a lot of unanswered questions, but we'll deal with that later. Let's first talk about the technical part. There's a whole lot more references as well. So, and we'll be touching on them as we go. All right. So first of all, what might the energy needs be for these data centers? Because after all, that's what we're talking about. We're engineers, aren't we? That's what we do. We build things, we design things, we provide energy for them. We draw pictures, all kinds of good stuff. So, but you can't, figure out what you need to do unless it's hard to solve a problem unless you define the problem. So let's take a look. Here we have historic and projected United States data center energy needs. And notice it was from 2014 on up to almost 2020. It was, relatively flat. Yeah, sure, it doubled from 50 to 100, but in terms of terawatt hours, that's not a whole lot of terawatt hours compared to the total number out there. Well, look what's happening here in the orange. Now, this report done by Berkeley was published at the end of the blue bars here, and this is all Berkeley material. And notice that as of 2023, things had started growing kind of exponentially. In 2024, they've had kind of minimum and maximum estimates of the energy needs, depending on whether these things really, these are all the anticipated and planned centers, whether or not they make it out of the ground or not. This is going to be the energy needs. And of course, everybody's been fussing about, we got to fire up the coal plants, we got to fire up the gas plants, we got to fire up everything to make these things run. The question is, well, what if we just kept on doing what we're doing with solar and wind? Would that help? And we're going to try to answer that question as well. In fact, that's the one question I'm going to answer, and then you can decide for yourself whether we should really be pursuing the other sources. Why would I do a thing like that? Well, because solar and wind are my favorite topics. And furthermore, I have a 5-year-old great grandson about to become 6, and I'd like to see a decent world for him. So I tend to think in terms of him more than in terms of me. I don't have that many years going on, but enough till I'll see some very important changes for sure. I've already seen some. Anyway, let's see. I look here, and in 2018. The 1.9% of total electrical energy consumption went into data centers. In 2023, it was up to 4.4. So that's more than a doubling in a matter of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And somewhere in 2028, it's going to be up somewhere between 6.7 and 12%. So, you know, that's 6 times as much, almost, as in 2018. That's a fairly substantial increase. So the question is, where does the energy go? Can we produce it locally at the energy centers, at data centers? What is it in the data center that eats up all this electricity and so forth? These are the kind of things we're going to talk about. Okay. Now, this is energy. So the question is, well, you know, you don't just provide people with kilowatt hours, as many as they want. You have to have a generator that generates kilowatts so that the person wanting to use that energy can get it when they want to use it. So if we assume a 50% capacity factor, and it's hard to guess exactly what it should be, but 50% is not unreasonable. It's sort of close to what the current system-wide electrical capacity is in the country. In other words, we're saying if a power plant's running at full power, 24/7 for every day of the year, then it would be running at 100% capacity. But as we all know, we have to be built in order to meet the maximum summer demand. But most of the time, we're not using that much. So a lot of the power plants are sitting idle out there and waiting until they're needed. So taking that into account, then let's move on here. And first of all, this is a long reference to that Berkeley study. And like I say, if you're really curious about this topic and want to spend a couple of days reading this study, I would strongly encourage you to do that, because it's a really great place to get started. And I guarantee if you read this study, you're probably not going to stop there. You'll probably want to start asking a few more questions. So anyway, so what about generation growth rates? And looking at this and comparing with capacity and data center loads. So in 2024, the estimated data center terawatt hour consumption is roughly 200 terawatt hours from that last graph. And in 2028, it's estimated that the terawatt hour consumption will be about 580. So the question is, what if we tried to do that with just solar, or maybe with solar plus wind? Could we do that with renewables only? Forget about trying to find out parts for the old coal plants that most people aren't manufacturing anymore. and forget about trying to build new natural gas plants and try, just let's look at what some of the other options are. How do they cost? What are the comparative costs? Because everybody wants to base things on life cycle costs. Well, maybe not everybody, but lots of people think that's a pretty good way to do it. So let's take a look here. In 2024, the total photovoltaic terawatt hour generation in the United States was 303.2. Okay, and number one is for references at the end. In 2024, the total wind generation was 453 terawatt hours. So wind is ahead of solar in the United States. If you live in northern Iowa, you understand how that could be. Seems that Iowa gets a whole lot of its electricity from wind, and you all in Minnesota, you go out to the Buffalo Ridge out in western Minnesota and see lots of windmills out there. So yeah, wind is something that it's really great if you have a place that's windy. Down here in Florida, wind is not our best option. Sun is. We don't have that much wind, maybe some offshore, but it gets pretty deep water offshore pretty fast. And it makes it a little more complicated to build offshore wind. So yeah, we've had proposals to build windmills up the middle of the turnpike and so forth, but people have done the numbers, and believe me, Xcel Energy would have been doing it if they figured it would cost effective, but it's not happening. Not Xcel Energy, sorry, NextEra. Xcel's up in Minnesota. NextEra is down here in Florida. So let's look at 28, what's happening here. But first, let's look at growth rates. Annually, the photovoltaic growth rate in the United States over the last 5 years or so has been almost 50% more every year. And this is, based on the previous year. And wind growth rate has been 17%. So, in other words, next year is going to be 1.17 more installed than total installed than this year. And so if we do that, if we use those historic numbers, and if the trends were to continue, then by 2028, we would have 1,535 terawatt hours of kilowatt hour generation available by solar, and we'd have 849 by wind. And, why would solar pass up wind? Well, partly it's price, partly its location, because a lot of the good wind locations have already been used up. And we already talked about that. So in any case, if we did that, that's a lot. That's actually an increase of 1,628 terawatt hours between those two dates in 4-year time. Will that do the job? Will it happen? Well, we got a couple of years before we'll know for sure, but does it make sense to even try to do it? And whether maybe it's going to happen whether we try or not, because maybe it's so attractive that it's the only thing the utilities might want to do. And most of the argument we're going to make here today is not going to be a thing about, well, my goodness, there's climate change and the place is going to boil and this and that, and the ocean's going to rise and flood me out and stuff. We're just going to talk about money and the economics of this stuff. And because people are pretty sensitive to money these days, and that's kind of right daily issue. So we're going to look at money, and you can then decide whether money that's spent on renewables maybe has some side benefits as well. So in any case, let's look at some of those details. By the way, here's your information. Wikipedia is for number one, U.S. Energy Information Agency is for number two. And now we go back to the Berkeley study. And here we have some of the nice, pretty pictures that they provide. And notice this is breaking down all that energy consumption you saw on that first slide. Where is it going once it gets into the into the data center? And notice the yellow, the orange, and the light orange, dark orange, and the red lines represent single processor, dual processor, 4 processor, and 8 processor. And these are just straightforward processors that process information but don't necessarily do artificial intelligence. When we start adding artificial intelligence to the mix, then we have the non-accelerated, and then we have the artificial intelligence 2 graphic processing unit, 4 graphic processing unit, and 8 graphic processing unit. Now, I do not claim any expertise in any of these areas, and anyone who is really interested in what an 8 GPU graphic processor unit is, I invite you to go to the internet, because that's where all this information is stored, thanks to all this stuff that's in these data centers. So we're talking about them, we might as well use them to find out more about them. Only makes sense. Also, it seems only fair, and they'll probably love us for using them. So in any case, but we're looking at the historic and the future scenarios, and you see what's happening here. As we move into more use of graphic processing units, the energy usage just jumps like crazy. So it's not the routine store your banking data. You don't need a lot of artificial intelligence to keep track of your bank account. I mean, I can do a pretty good job of that with on paper and pencil, and if I want to do better than I can use an Excel spreadsheet. So if I don't want it to write books for me or something like that, then the amount of energy used is relatively small. We're going to look at some of the applications a little bit later as well, but in any case, here we're seeing that it's these graphic processing units that are the culprits when it comes to the huge increase in use of energy by data centers. And those are the guys where the Yudkowsky folks talk about the superhuman intelligence and whether that's a smart thing to do or not. Why do we want to make a machine that's smarter than we are? Talk to my wife, who's a college professor, and the students that she has who love to write their papers, love to let their computer write the paper for them while they're out doing whatever. Not sure they learn anything other than how to get the computer to write something for them, and whether or not that's a valid way of using a human brain, or whether we should be using our human brains for human intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, we're looking at, so if we look at these processors, and here's an interesting energy and engineering picture for the electrical engineers in the group. When some of you probably do service calculations, you notice the 2020 National Electrical Code now requires surge suppressors on every service entrance to the building. And is that per lightning, or is it because maybe this is what's happening in the data centers? What we have here is a minute by minute power draw picture for an 8-node Llama 70B training system. And notice it's showing all 8 nodes, but the transients there are crazy, aren't they? And can you imagine what kind of transients might be happening on the microsecond scale? And whether or not they're finding their way out into the utility system. Now, it may be so, but transformers like to kind of filter out some of this high frequency stuff. But how much of it gets through? And how much of it might end up at your own electrical service entrance where, like a lightning spike, can mess around with your own equipment at home. So I'm not sure anybody really has a good idea what the total effect this kind of transient activity could have on a distribution system, but my guess is people are thinking about it pretty carefully. And I'm guessing this might be part of the reason, other than just lightning strikes, that folks have decided that surge suppressors are a pretty good deal when it comes to saving sensitive electronic equipment inside a building.
Excuse
So
me,
in any case,
I'm sorry, when you're talking about the NEC, are you referring to the requirement on residential?
yeah, that's right. I'm talking about new requirement on residential. I think it started in 2020. And it,
I thought that the stated goal of that was really life safety to help preserve a lot of medical devices being used at homes.
well, certainly that, but yes, sure. The goal is to protect the medical devices, but the question is, where do the surges come from? And you know, that's lightning for sure, but something like this maybe might also be a cause. I'm not blaming it, but it's certainly some interesting stuff that needs to be smoothed out. Otherwise, it can mess with some pretty sensitive electronic equipment. But thank you for mentioning that, because it's a very good point. And I know that every photovoltaic job we design, because we're messing with tying something into the main service, we need to require them to install a surge suppressor. So if it's an old system that didn't have one, it's going to have one after our PV system goes in, and it isn't because of the PV system. It's because NEC requires it for all new systems. But that's a good point, and that probably is the main reason. But then you have to ask, where did the transients come from? And maybe they're been there all the time, but maybe some, I can't tell you whether they're getting worse or not. I can tell we lost the control system of a rooftop air conditioning unit, and we lost the radio last time we had a lightning strike that hit the roof of the building next to us. So yeah, the interesting stuff. Does that cover what you? I just want to make sure that my response is adequate for what you were commenting on.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So I just want to point out that transients are an issue that's out there, but you know, it's not just electricity. The data centers use, they use a lot of water. So two different criteria have been developed for evaluating how clean or how efficient a data center is. And one is the power usage effectiveness. And what it is a ratio of the total electricity demand of the data center compared to the demand of the data equipment itself. And this is expressed in kilowatt hours per kilowatt hour. So if you use 150 kilowatt hours to run your whatever, your computer or whatever, how much electricity did you have to run to keep the rest of the house going? And the data center, how much energy total do you use for the lights and the air conditioning and everything versus how much for the actual product that you're making use of. Then there's a water usage effectiveness, and that's measured in terms of liters per kilowatt hour. So, of course, they could affect each other, because by using more water, you could make your IT equipment more efficient and lower the power usage effectiveness, but then the water usage effectiveness goes up because you have to use more liters per kilowatt hour. So they're interactive, and there's trade-off involved. And so obviously the availability of water is important as well, if you're going to use water cooling. We'll see a data center in China where they got away from water cooling, and we'll see the reason why when we get there. Location dependent is kind of important. Up there in Minnesota, you don't need quite as much cooling in the winter. I've never heard of a data center freezing out. They probably don't need much electricity to heat it, though, because the heat from the data center might very well keep the inside pretty warm. I'm not sure on that one. Have to look into that a little more further. Anyway, overall, the large scale centers tend to have lower values for these two criteria. And that's chosen in the graph. But let's realize that the minimum electrical criterion is 1, because obviously if all of the electricity is used for the data and nothing is used for anything else, then you drop down to 1. Whereas the water use efficiency can be 0 because it could mean everything is air cooled and there's no water used to cool anything. So we're trying to get down to 1 on the PUE and 0 on WE, and that is considered to be good. A goal for engineers, all of us engineers, that's what we like to do, is make everything efficient and good, and that makes our clients happy, it makes us happy, and on it goes. Okay, so here's some estimates. Here's the estimate of power use efficiency. And notice that it's getting better. It's estimated power use efficiency, even with the less efficient machines, it will still be more efficient in 2028 than it was back in 2014. Water use efficiency or effectiveness, however, that's another story. It looks like the water situation is going to get worse. So more water is going to be needed. And so if there's any water engineers, that's another story. And of course, where's this water going to come from? And again, there's so many side stories about Mexico and Ireland and so forth, where once they put that data center that was going to be all end all, and the people started not having enough water and not having enough electricity, then the story changes a whole lot. And that gets into other factors involved in these centers that we'll talk about a little bit later. So anyway, this is what historically seems to be happening, and there's projections for. It's a regional thing too, obviously. Out west, there's not as much water, and out east, there is more. These are pretty fuzzy graphs, but there's no way I was going to be able to try to redraw them. So I thank the folks from the Berkeley study for drawing them. And they look fine in their study, but when you try to put them onto a big screen, they get a little blurry. But you get the idea that the blue is the water consumption intensity relatively low, and red is high in terms of availability and so forth. So if you're looking at what's the story up in Minnesota, Minnesota's orange in terms of greenhouse gas emission intensity, and because different areas of the country make their electricity different ways. And it's interesting to look at North Carolina there that has a lot of renewable energy. And so their greenhouse gas emissions are relatively low by their electric utilities. On the other hand, get into those mountain states and not the same story. Anyway, it's interesting to see just the regional differences in how important it is about water and electricity, and for that matter, overall greenhouse gas emission. That's for those who are concerned about greenhouse gas emission. Almost everybody's concerned about water, but not necessarily everybody believes greenhouse gas emission is important. But for those who think it's important, there's a picture. So what about server use? Energy used by the server type. And here you see, once again, the idea that when we're starting to get to the 8 GPU energy AI graphic processor unit, in 2028, that could be the major energy usage creature out there. It could be. It's interesting to compare, and we will in a minute, the processing part versus the memory part, the thinking part versus the part that just saves the information. And here's the memory part right here. And notice that that's pretty down, that's pretty low. We're looking at 20 terawatt hours versus how many terawatt hours did we have? 300, 400? No, we have 100. So Oh, but then 2028, wait a minute, we're up to 400 in 2028. So the if we move here to memory, that's a pretty small part of the total part. So I feel a little bitter about that when I ask my computer for some information that it remembers. If you'll please just tell me the answer of how many people lived in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1950. That's down here in this blue and orange range. And so it's not just the data centers, it's what's in the data center. And that's what people are a little upset about, is what's going to go into these things, because a data center ain't just a data center. It could be one that does the blue kind of stuff, or it could be one that does the orange kind of stuff, or, heavy duty or light duty use of electricity. So the thing about flash drive is if you unplug it, it doesn't use any energy. On the other hand, those are long-term storage and a super high resistance, a big capacitor. And if you don't plug them in every once in a while to get them recharged, you lose the memory on them. So if you have flash drives in your drawer that have been there for a while, you should plug them in just to see what's still on them. And if it's still on them, that means that your computer has refreshed them and they can last a long time. But without having a refreshing circuit, they can lose all their information simply by very, very slow decay of the charge difference between the it's called basically metal oxide semiconductor structure. In cloud backup, this memory has to be accessible all the time, so they're plugged in all the time. But at home, if you got a flash drive, I've got a bunch of them sitting right on the desk and just alongside of me that are not using any energy to my knowledge. Probably absorbing some heat energy from the room, but that's about it. So it's interesting to compare memory uses versus processor usage. By function, here's this big building. It's got servers in it with specialized in artificial intelligence. Some are just conventional servers that keep track of financial transactions and stuff. Some are energy storage. And then there's a network connection involved, and then there's the infrastructure. So this is also a very useful piece of information here on where does the energy actually go that is involved with the data centers. And so we noticed that, yeah, the network, but that's pretty insignificant. The storage is not much. Infrastructure, a fair amount for the infrastructure, be able to connect from one place to another. And in fact, keeping the energy in the building where the equipment is located. But once again, it shows very clearly that the AI servers are the big time energy users. So when we talk about people wanting regulation and so forth for data centers, generally what they're talking about is no, we're not fussing about the good part of data centers, the memory, the stuff like that. That comes in really handy. But how much do we really need this? What are the trade-offs with this AI specialized servers? What price do we really pay that might be hidden? But before we get there, we need to figure out whether we can afford it. Well, I guess we already did, didn't we? Well, anyway, let's take a look at what we've got out there. Here's 2024. Here's what was being generated. Total 4,178 billion kilowatt hours. That's a lot more than that 500 billion kilowatt hours we're talking about, or whatever. Or less than that in 2024 for the data centers, pretty small fraction. The percentages are consistent with what we just saw. And here's how we made it. Natural gas, 38%, nuclear, 20%, coal, 17%, wind, 12%, hydro, 7%, and solar, 6%. That's what was happening in 2024. And notice the total renewables there were, in fact, 25% of the total. If you talk about wind, hydro, And solar, that's just 1/4 of that circle, isn't it? So let's look at 2020. Wait a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm also reading my own closed captions, which is getting in the way of some things. Here, some of the numbers here. What is a billion kilowatt hours is a terawatt hour? Energy is presented in so many different kinds of units, like quads, kilowatt hours, watt hours, terawatt hours, megawatt hours, billion kilowatt hours, and so on. So in any case, 500 terawatt hours of data centers, data center energy in 2028 is 12% of the 2024 total. If we add 500 terawatt hours to the total energy by way of renewables by 2028, we'd have to have an overall increase in renewables generation of 48% in 4 years. And what that boils down to is 10.3% per year for 4 years. In other words, multiply the 2024 number by 1.103 times 1.103, do that 4 times, or 1.103 to the 4th power, and you get 1.48. So all it needs is a 10.3% per year growth. And we've already shown we can do a lot better than that. So what's all this talk about the need for gas-fired power plants and stuff? Well, of course, we got other things that need to use electricity. Even if data centers are using 12%, something else is using the other 88%. In fact, there's these electric vehicles coming along. Well, we're going to look at some numbers, and in fact, with renewables, we can actually meet the needs of data centers and electric vehicles and the whole 9 yards if we put our minds to it that that's the way we want to do it. But what does it cost? Well, we'll take a look at that. Here's your historic comparison. Historic growth rates average 16.2% since 2014. The highest one was 21.3%. And in 2024 was 19.3%. So, that's almost twice what we need, the 10.3%, okay? So this is doable. That's doable stuff. And why would anybody do this unless they could afford it? This is big time. Why would anybody spend money to make electricity this way unless it made sense? So let's take a look at some 2023 overall use data. Electrical generation used 32.1 quads of primary energy from all sources, and in order to deliver 13.2 quads of electricity. So you can see the efficiency of 13.2 over 32.1. And there's something about second law of thermodynamics for the mechanical engineers, and even the double E's who remembered their thermodynamics course, that you can't run a heat engine at 100% efficiency. You got a high temperature, a low temperature, and that affects it. 37% of transportation of primary energy, all this oil that comes out of the Straits of Hormuz, we're all familiar with that now, and other places, of course, like the United States and Canada and Russia and Venezuela and other places. In 2023, less than 1% of transportation used electricity. It was all oil, gasoline. We look at industry, 26.1 quads of primary energy, and 18.9% of the electricity that was generated goes to industry. Residential used 15% of the electricity generated, and 11.3 quads. And commercial uses 50% of the electricity that's generated and 9.3 quads of additional primary energy, like natural gas or something for heating or whatever you're producing heat with. Okay, or maybe it's a restaurant that uses natural gas stoves and ovens, things like that. Okay, so what's a quad? Because just another way people measure things. Quad happens to be 293.0832 billion kilowatt hours. And the overall electrical conversion efficiency is 41%, 32.1 quads in, 13.2 out. Pretty consistent. That's actually pretty efficient for a heat engine. Electricity goes everywhere, just like it shows. So here's where the primary energy sources are. There's petroleum, natural gas, renewables, coal, and nuclear. So that's adds up to your 100% of your primary energy sources. So 93.6 quads total primary used in order to meet our energy needs, some of which is direct use of primary energy, some of which is use of primary electricity converted to primary energy converted to electricity. Okay. Losses 18.9 Q. That means, of course, losses generally go out as heat because we're talking about heat engines here. And we know that happens in transportation. We know that happens. Look at your local electrical generation facility in the smokestack, and you know that not only smoke goes up that stack, but some heat goes up there as well. And not only up that stack, but the water that's being used to cool the facility. So it's interesting to know where all this stuff is coming from. So how much does it cost? Here is the key. And there are folks who have developed this thing called the levelized cost of electricity to compare energy and electrical generation sources. And what the levelized cost of electricity does is it basically adds up the total cost of operating an electrical thing over its lifetime, all of which are also taking into account the time cost of money, inflation, discount rates, things like that. So the total cost of construction, fuel maintenance, decommissioning of a facility over the lifetime, and this divided by the total output, and taking into account that next year might not make as much as this year, and so on. If you do that, here's what we get. And these are estimates for 2025 that came out from this outfit does a lot of estimates, and we'll see that reference in just a minute. But look at the differences here for the different fuel sources. We got 10 cents for coal per kilowatt hour. So in other words, coal is a minimum charge, 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That's your fuel cost. Not just the fuel, but it's fuel plus everything. But 10 cents for coal, most expensive, almost. Natural gas, combined cycle, 5 cents a kilowatt hour. And this is if we were to install them. And we don't have nuclear on this particular graph because nobody's installing any new nuclear right now. But photovoltaics on utility scale is about 2.7 cents a kilowatt hour. Compare that with 5 cents for natural gas. Why would a utility want to install natural gas if they can make electricity with the sun? There's no fluctuation in the price of the sun. It's going to be about the same for the next 4.5 billion years. So, which is zero. So that seems like a pretty good choice at 2.7 cents a kilowatt hour. And so why would anybody want to do anything else? Well, of course, the sun doesn't shine at night, so that could be an issue. So we need to look into that. And the wind at 3 cents, just a little over 3 cents a kilowatt hour. So you can see why wind and solar are so popular amongst the utilities all over the country and why the growth has been going so fast historically, because they are extremely cost effective. And when you add the environmental effects as well, they just go way off the scale. Some have estimated, for example, if we added the externality costs of petroleum to the cost of gasoline, we'd have to add an extra $4 a gallon. So that's interesting. And that's not even on. This is only electrical generation here, not utility or sorry, electric cars or gasoline cars. Anyway, if we have to add storage to be realistic to photovoltaics and wind, well, it turns out that storage at today's cost now is only between 3 cents and 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So even if you add a nickel a kilowatt hour, we're still pretty inexpensive for that solar and wind, especially given that the solar that's generated during the day can mostly be used during the day. And you don't have to store all of it. You just need to store enough for at night. We'll take a look at a picture in a minute to see what that adds up to. So anyway, and this is from NREL, which is no longer NREL. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory is now the National Laboratory of the Rockies, because we don't do renewable energy anymore. We only do laboratories of the Rockies. But back when NREL was in business, they did this calculator, and it's pretty handy. You can look up the formula. There are lots of different ways to find that formula. So anyway, what if we wanted to make 500 terawatt hours a year with photovoltaics? How much would it take? Well, depends on where. But a pretty good average is about 1,700 kilowatt hours per kilowatt per year for commercial photovoltaics. And there are some places we're up to 2,200, or somewhere maybe down 1,500. So 1,700 is a pretty conservative number to use for commercial PV. So if we go with that, then we can get an idea of how much of it are we going to need, how much space it's going to take. So let's look at some numbers here. If we have 22% efficient modules, and knowing that the sun intensity is 1,000 watts per square meter, then the maximum electricity you can make is 220 watts per square meter. All right. And that's 10.7 square feet, or an acre is 47 square meters. I threw in a bunch of these conversion factors in case anybody who really wants to go over these numbers again. We'll see where the conversion factors came from. We're going to gloss through them kind of quickly so we don't have to stay here through dinner time. For maximum output, the lange coverage will be probably less than 50% because you need to have some space between the rows if they're at a proper tilt. And so if you have land coverage of 50%, then you can get about 2,000 square meters of photovoltaic modules on an acre. And you can do more than that. And you can get more electricity out of that acre, but it's not quite as efficient. But if you want to get, if your acreage is a critical factor, you can reduce the tilt and reduce the output, but per acre, increase the total amount per acre. And that's a little more complicated exercise, but we're just going to do this as a conservative estimate here. If we take, this means that with the previous number, 220 watts per square meter, that means we got about 440,000 watts per acre. Okay, and how much do we need? Well, first of all, what do we get for kilowatt hours? If we need 1,700 kilowatt hours per kilowatt per year, that means every acre will generate about 748,000 kilowatt hours per year. which is 748 megawatt hours per year, which is 0.748 gigawatt hours per year. It's all a matter of what you're looking at. Okay. So 1,000 acres can give 0.748 terawatt hours per year. And if we want 500 terawatt hours per year, we're going to take 668,000 acres, which happens to be 1,044 square miles, which is about 32 by 32, which compared to the area of the entire United States, that's kind of a small patch, isn't it? And if you want to compare it, that's about the same area as the area of the United States Interstate Highway System. It happens to have 46,876 square miles of road. So, well, wait a minute now. That's 46,876. Oh, wait now. They have 46,876 miles of road. I'm sorry, I have another line here. I forgot that. I got one more line. Let's say the right of way is 180 feet wide. From the fence on the left-hand side to the fence on the or fence on the northbound lane to the fence on the southbound lane. That's about 1,044 square miles. So we're looking at an area about equal to the area of the interstate highway system. So it's not that we haven't used that much area to do things before. It's there. So how big are the data centers? Let's look at that. Let's also look at what time it is. 3:02. We got an hour to go. Okay. There are about 11,800 data centers worldwide, and the 13 largest ones are somewhere in the neighborhood of 830,000 square feet to 10 million and change. The big one is the China Telecom Data Center in Hohhot, China. And it's mostly used for telecommunications and cloud computing and financial. That's what they say. Well, if we assume that's the case, it's been around for a while, so this fancy AI has only taken hold in the last 5 years or so. So it could well be that there's not a whole lot of fancy AI on this machine in this center. But in any case, it's based on green data policies. It's located up on a high 10,000 foot high plateau. And it's cold up there. It's almost like Minnesota. Well, in certain times of the year. I'm sorry, Minnesota guys. Like I mentioned, I'll be up with you in about a week. I can't wait to come. Haven't been up there in the winter for a while, but I do remember marching in the St. Paul winter carnival parade at the end of January, 65 years ago. And one of those nights it was 20 below zero. That was pretty chilly. We're getting off topic here, but it's hard to not think about that once in a while when I look out the window and see how hot it is out there, about 90. Anyway, it has green data policies located in the region. It's up high, 10,000 feet or so. Big plateau. The interesting thing about 10,000 feet is there's less atmosphere, so that there's more than 1,000 watts per square meter of solar available up there. You lose about 30% of the total solar insolation that's at the top of the atmosphere by the time it gets to the Earth. So you pick up almost another 100 watts per square meter at that altitude. The Citadel campus in Reno ranks number 3 worldwide at 7,750,000 square feet. And guess what? It is the only company among all 13 that has a 100% clean energy index. So congratulations, Reno. You did a good job on that one in terms of energy. It's out there, so we know it can be done. Now, the areas that we show here for the data centers are floor area, but they're not necessarily roof area. And I say that because it's interesting to compare if we cover the rooftops of the data centers with solar, would that be enough? Because we've found in our own experience here in Florida, and the average residential system we design has been about 11,000 watts. And that average 11,000 watts will generally provide essentially 100% of that building's electrical needs in the year. Not necessarily when they need them, but it makes as much as the building uses. And of course, anything that the building doesn't use, that the residence doesn't use, goes back to the utility. And so there are times when the residence simply is making more electricity than it needs, and there are other times when it is not making as much as it needs. But overall, it can make its total annual needs with that 11,000 square foot on its roof and have enough left to power an electric vehicle as well. So that's interesting that for residential and the way we use electricity in a regular household situation, if we do it relatively efficiently, we can do it with what's on our roof. But guess what? You can't do that with a data center. I've tried really hard. I was hoping, boy, that's maybe possible. When we do the numbers, it doesn't work. So if we look at 10 million square feet, that's 0.3587 square miles. All right. And here's your reference on the largest data centers in the world in 2025. And here he or she, it is in China, up on that big plateau, and you see it's clearly more than 1 story high. But that's what this one looks like. Pretty new. 0.409 square miles of land. Doing these presentations is you have so much fun doing conversions from hectares to square miles and so forth. And of course, you just ask your computer, how many square miles is 106 hectares? And it tells you right away, and it goes some data center gets you that. So, we're using a data center here to help us. So whatever I'm saying here, I'm not saying data centers are all bad, but there's something to be looked at. And what we're trying to do is figure out how do we provide them with power if we're going to do what we want to do with them. Look at those ducts there that come down from the roof. Pretty interesting. Okay, so what are the power and energy consumption of these? Seems to be 100 watts per square feet. It seems to be. Wish we knew, but it's hard to get that data. But it appears that it's somewhere, if you just take the total square footage of them and then take the total energy consumption, this doesn't necessarily apply to any one, but if we take the neighborhood, 100 watts per square foot, just to see what you could do with a rooftop, then let's take a look at what the numbers come out. So if we do this, we can get a wild guess estimate and load factor of 50%, then annually you should be able to make about 438 kilowatt hours per square foot per year. Okay. And if you do that, then what's that's going to be? Well, that means a million square foot facility would use 0.438 terawatt hours per year. And if it's 1,336 acres per terawatt hour, that means you got 585 acres. And 25 acres happens to be in square feet, 25.48 million square feet. All right, so what have we got here now? Let's see, power consumption, 100 watts per square feet. So we're looking at trying to do a single building. And if it's 1 million square feet, it probably would use about 0.438 terawatts per hours per year. But that means if 1 million 10 square foot building would mean it needs 25 times that. an area to make the electricity it needs if it's going to do it with solar. Okay, so that's 25 times more energy intense than a residence, even more than 25 times more than tense. So that's orders of magnitude stuff that we're looking at in terms of how is the energy consumption, how does it compare in a data center within in a simple residential situation. And it's roughly 25 times as much per square foot. Or simply 25 times as much. So then there's this thing about sun not shining all the time. So let's take a look at some of this. Obviously, if we want to provide all of this wind and solar, we have to have some storage. All right. And so where's the storage going to come from? Well, one thing we have to remember is, you know, probably everybody here today is sitting in front of a laptop. And a laptop has got a battery in it. That's your energy storage. It's associated with your computing power. So that's how much energy storage you need to do your computing. And that storage lasts for what, 3-4 hours, something like that? We got a lot of other stuff plugged in here, maybe a bigger screen and some speakers and a few other things plugged in, but we can make the energy we need for it is being made up on our roof. So, but what about at night? And what about when wind doesn't blow? How much storage are we going to need? Let's see if we can do an estimate. Then, of course, there's a load management thing. And notice I got a email from my local utility just yesterday saying, hey, how would you like to join our new load management program? And actually, almost 60 years ago, we joined. Not 60, 50 years ago, 45 years ago, we joined a load management program with our local utility when they paid us to keep our air conditioner and our water heater turned off at certain times during the day. They put their own control system on there. And they paid us a few bucks a month for letting them manage our water heater and air conditioner so they can meet their peak load. Well, we're in that situation right now. And so we can do load management. It's time true, time tested, and it's happening again more and more and more. And it's a matter of balancing what's the most economically feasible and sensible. So one of the things you can do is load management. Simply convince some people that if you don't use electricity when we need it someplace else, we'll give you a certain monthly benefit. Because otherwise we'd have a problem. Could be complicated math. If you got data center needs it, well, especially when it's difficult to predict exactly what their needs are going to be. But we can still do some estimates. Let's look at energy storage. First of all, production, use, and storage of any energy are three different things. Production or use are usually measured as energy per day, month, or year. You know, kilowatt hours per day, kilowatt hours per month, kilowatt hours per year. And when we think about energy storage, that's what fossil fuels are, aren't they? They're really energy storage. That took about 1 million years to build the storage units, and then it takes a little while to burn them, and you only get to use them once to recover the energy that took 1 million years to store. Not same with trees; they don't take quite as long, but coal and oil and natural gas take a long time to be created. So we've been doing energy storage since day one, but we got a new kind now where you can fill it and empty it and fill it and empty it for 6, 10, 20 thousands of times of cycles between full and empty. So if we look at energy per day, month, or year, we could see this. The storage is typically measured as the capacity between empty and full, like a 10 kilowatt hour storage battery, 13.5, 15, 20, or 1,000 for one of the bigger ones. So that's empty to full. But then the question is, how many times can you fill it and empty it in a day's time or a year's time or in a lifetime? So if you got a 6,000 cycle or a 10,000 cycle battery and you just cycle it full and empty once a day or the equivalent thereof, that's 6,000 days of operation. That's quite a long time, isn't it? So take, for example, 100 kilowatt hours of storage, 6,000 lifetime cycles. We can then do 100 kilowatt hours 6,000 times, or in other words, 600,000 kilowatt hour lifetime. Now, that's not quite true, because if we put 600,000 in, we're only going to get 90% of that back because there's some losses in charging and discharging. But still, if we just look at certainly 600,000 is a whole lot more than 100 kilowatt hours, isn't it? So we say, oh, that 100 kilowatt hour battery is really expensive. Well, wait a minute. If you'll do 100 kilowatt hours 6,000 times, then it's not quite as expensive per time, per cycle. So if we do the math on that, see, if the storage is just an uninterruptible power supply, then you're not using it. It's a backup system. So it's just your insurance policy if it's a backup system. But if you're able to fill it at noon and empty it at 5 in the afternoon, that's another story, or at night. So if we take all of the variables into account, and there's a whole lot more than 10 of them, if you were talking about interest rates and stuff, there's also a thing called the levelized cost of storage, which is similar to the levelized cost of electricity. And the formula looks like this, because I know you've been waiting for a formula, and I'm sure. Is there anybody out there who has not been waiting for a formula? Just open your mic and say me. If you've been disappointed so far that I haven't had more formulas.
Be okay with it.
I'm
Okay.
fine with no formulas.
I have trick question. Okay. Anyway, this is a formula, and this looks pretty complicated. And first of all, it's asking you to imagine what all these different interest rates are going to be, and what these different discount rates are going to be, and inflation rates and stuff like that. And what about fuel costs? Anybody who can predict any of that stuff for the future, uh, unless you borrow the money today at 5% or 6%, you can predict that is going to last for the life of it. But beyond that, the inflation rate, that varies by day. And forget about trying to have an average inflation rate, whatever. But people try anyway, because you can make a formula like this, you can plug it into an Excel worksheet, and after a while, you come up with an answer. But there, you can simplify this. And you can say, well, wait a minute, levelized cost of storage, just cost of the system divided by the lifetime of the system, how many kilowatt hours? So take that one we just had, 100 kilowatt hours, let's say it costs $30,000. Whoa! Sounds pretty expensive, doesn't it? But if we have 6,000 lifetime cycles, which is pretty typical for lithium, and lithium is almost on its way out because they're coming in for some fancy new solid state type battery stuff. But let's just take what we got at hand. Now we're looking at 5 cents a kilowatt hour for storage price. Now in order to pay for that, that means you have to be able to sell it for a nickel more than you bought it. But what did we say the production cost was for solar photovoltaics? I think we said 3 cents a kilowatt hour, didn't we? I'm sorry, I gotta hang my phone up. I had no idea why that. Okay. So if we're producing electricity from the sun for 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and we can sell it for, say, 8 cents a kilowatt hour, that's a pretty good deal for the utility, if somebody will save it for them for that. And then if they can buy it back if they're going to fire up a gas-fired plant to meet that peaking need, it's probably going to cost, I mean, I'll see some prices for peak time, worst case summer peak electricity of $1 a kilowatt hour. So let's say you just make 25 cents a kilowatt hour on a typical buyback. So you make 20 cents a kilowatt hour. That's not too bad, is it? I was actually putting that lithium to use rather than just using it as an insurance policy. So let's see what that amounts to. Well, I just said earlier that you only get 90% back. So essentially then that raises your cost per kilowatt hour to 0.0555. But then again, who knows what this other stuff is going to do? And depending on how you fudge your numbers or however you make your so-called educated guesses, and I leave that to the people who make educated guesses. But the numbers they come up with, believe it or not, are pretty close to what we're looking at right now. Because some tend to go up, some tend to go down, and they kind of cancel each other out. So this is not a bad simplification. It's not a bad first. It's not a bad starting point because it says, hey, this thing is not an order of magnitude out of line. 5 cents a kilowatt hour storage when we don't have to store all of it. How much of it do we have to store? Let's take a look. Maybe it looks like this. You know, here's your production on the orange curve during the day. Starts at the summer day morning. You can start making a little bit just before 6. And along about 7 p.m. it quits. We're talking about daylight savings time here. I mean, around 7 o'clock. So, and in the middle of the day, they're making a whole lot more than they need. And that's the stuff that goes into the batteries. And you notice that the area between the load using PV kilowatt hours between 6 in the morning and 6 at night, that excess PV storage is about the same area as the stuff between midnight and 6 in the morning and between 6 at night and midnight. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And so therefore you don't need to store the total amount, but more like about half of the amount. Of course, in the winter, then it's going to be maybe more. But keep in mind, we're just using photovoltaics here. If we add some wind to the picture, then it gets a little more complicated, but I think you see what I'm getting at. That you don't have to have the amount of storage that is equal to the amount of power you need at any one instant, 24/7. You just need it at the times when the other power sources are not available. Okay, so and of course, if you know your profile load, you can adjust these things. And what's it like? It's just like a standalone photovoltaic system. And I have a good friend of mine who grew up, not exactly grew up, but his family had a photovoltaic powered house. It was standalone photovoltaic powered house down in the Florida Keys in a place called No Name Key that did not have utility power until about 2005 or something like that. So they had a photovoltaic system that made all their electricity, and they had battery storage for night. So these were common all over the place before the turn of the century. Not all over, but wherever anybody really wanted some electricity and didn't want to have to put in a fossil fuel generator. So it's not new technology is the bottom line, and a whole lot of improvements have been made. So this can be a single grid connected system, or it can be multiple, same idea. What about the winter? Well, first of all, we have too much generation in the summer and not enough in the winter, or what? Well, the interesting, if you look at the loads, here's a New England situation, and that pretty pink one is July, where you need more electricity at 5 in the afternoon. And that's when the sun shines more. And maybe even the wind blows more. And maybe you can get some hydro and so forth. January, you need that peaking electricity in the afternoon, a little bit of peaking in the morning as well when the heat comes on a little bit higher. And then there's your seasonal off season, your April and October, where you're down to significantly less demand. So if your production goes down in the winter, and if your demand goes down in the winter, and here we're talking overall demand, this is not this is overall total demand of all the loads. That's not data center. Data center demands would tend to be more constant all year round. But in any case, the seasonal demand part here is sort of consistent with the amount of electricity you make. And if you're using solar not just for the data centers, but for everybody else around, then what the data centers don't use could go to the other people, the other users. So the source here came out of energymag.net. And in the south, it's a little bit different, but you notice there's no summer peak except in the afternoon, but the pretty substantial biggest peak is at 7 in the morning for the worst case winter demand. When it gets cold in the morning, everybody turns on their electric heat. And then the afternoon, you got your typical afternoon peak, but it's a little bit later in the day than it is in the summer. And would the Florida Public Service Commission put out bad data? Of course not. They'd never do a thing like that. So anyway, it just gives relative idea of what's the difference between winter peaking and summer peaking. Notice here we're just talking about 100% of the total load for worst case peaking. It's our hourly average demand in terms of the seasonal peak for the Florida case. So we don't have the spring and fall data, just the winter and the fall, winter and summer. So here's total monthly U.S. energy consumption by all sectors. Just see what it looks like. Average summer peak in August, 393 terawatt hours. January winter peak, 344. April's down to 285. So depending on the whole point here is that wherever you are, you've got a little bit different situation you need to deal with in terms of how much storage are you going to need. But the methodology is there and the technology is there to figure it out. And it all, the numbers we did were overall for the whole United States. But that means if it works everywhere, then it pretty much has to work for the whole country. Then hopefully for the whole is the sum of the parts, and hopefully it also works in the various parts where it's needed. So, and we talk about the uninterruptible power supply. If in fact the uninterruptible power supply of a data center can be used for grid backup, then they become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So all that extra storage where they were used only for backup, if they can use it for not just backup, but for grid backup, that could be nice. I'm sure the utilities would love it, and I'm sure the folks could strike a deal on it. And just final note that rotating generation is not on calculation here because it has to comply. This generation that's in these various storage things has to comply with IEEE 1547-2018, which means that when it feeds electricity back to the grid, it has to feed it back to meet the requirements of the grid. It has to be in phase so that it doesn't have terrible transient problems, and it has to be a nice sine wave. So that's what IEEE 1547-2018 says, is that you can sell electricity back to the utility at the request of the utility, when the utility begins to drop in frequency, meaning that it's becoming overloaded, if the utility wants you to, and rather than shutting down, and rather than just getting out of the way and making the problem worse, you can keep your solar running or your wind and be a part of the solution. Because after all, we're not talking about transmission lines down or distribution lines down for a total complete outage. We're talking about just an overload on the system. How do we fix it? And if we can fix it locally with batteries locally, then maybe we don't have a blackout or a brownout. So anyway, if you're not familiar with IEEE 1547-2018, that's a nice long standard. Feel free to download it and take a look as well. I think they might charge for it. Anyway, let's now move away from the technical part. How are we doing on time? Let's take a look. Half hour left, that's about right. An hour and a half on technical. What do you do with AI? Well, nothing like artificial creativity, music, words, social media, cheating on college exams, stuff like that. Detection of facial features, that's kind of useful at an airport to take a look in that camera and it says, oh, I know who that guy is. And then there's the chat box, and I'm not even going to tell you what I think about chatbots. I think you probably got from the tone of my voice what I think about them. Autonomous vehicles, that's interesting. Self-driving vehicles. Yeah, maybe good if the driver's drunk or blind or deaf or something, but they're coming along. Certainly have those Mercedes out there that drive themselves and the Teslas that drive themselves. A few others, I imagine. Space exploration. That moon launch lately was pretty precise. Had some pretty good AI behind it. Gaming. Oh my gosh, gambling. Another word for gaming. Well, games too. I play Freecell and stuff like that. A lot of fun. Banking, finance, agriculture, healthcare, marketing. So, there's a lot of good uses of AI out there. So we're certainly not saying let's get rid of that stuff completely. But wait a minute, I went backwards. There were a few observations on education, medical, and legal analysis. MIT observes that these may be the wrong tool or at least have a less energy-intensive alternative. Okay, so maybe these are questionable. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. ChatGPT is the 5th most visited website in the world. Wow. What's it used for? Could any of them possibly be dishonest or unethical? Ask my wife. She'll tell you all about it. She had a class this summer. 100% of the people in the class use AI for their solutions, for their written exams. Did they learn anything? They learned how to use AI. Did they learn anything about the subject matter? Probably nothing. So, the purpose of taking a class. So are we going to have to repurpose universities? Are they no longer going to be encouraged to encourage students to think for themselves? Pretty tough question. As a retired university professor, you probably can imagine how I feel about that. What's the cost of cryptocurrency? We're going to take some looks at this. It's very interesting. I'm not sure if any of you own any cryptocurrency. I'm going to a restaurant tonight. I don't think if I offered to pay them in cryptocurrency, I don't think they would take it. So therefore, it's an interesting thing. Are any drugs wasted? Because my friend at CVS keeps calling me to tell me a prescription's been filled without me asking them to refill it. I don't know. I can't get through that system to tell them, hey, wait a minute, I don't need this stuff. If I go to the counter, they can't get through to their computer. I go to the computer, you can't get through to it. So it's I don't know how you do about that. So, not a perfect deal. How can the good be preserved and the not so good be eliminated? That's really what it kind of boils down to. Here's some projects that are coming out. There's Stargate. Apple's got 500 billion on data centers. Google's got 75 billion on an AI infrastructure. And if you look at this article here, it really presents quite an interesting picture of the conundrum that the utilities are facing. And, we kind of get caught in the middle of it as engineers because some of us work for utilities, some work whatever, but we all depend on utilities. They're not bad things, but they're really caught in a bind here when North Carolina utilities in particular, you read their recent story about how the prices are presumably going to go up thanks to the data centers there. Here's your Bitcoin story. And look at the number of terawatt hours that are being consumed by Bitcoins. Somebody collecting Bitcoins. I don't know how many people own Bitcoins, but I doubt that more than a small percentage of the population has any ownership of Bitcoin. But it sure uses a lot of energy, doesn't it? And we notice the different bounds, best estimate, EIA, that's the United States Energy Information Administration. But anyway, going up, isn't it, between 2016 and 2024, and we're not even sure what the real numbers are. Best estimate, bottom up, lower bound, upper bound. Not even sure how much energy was used by them. If you compare the price of Bitcoin and the energy consumption of Bitcoin, as the price goes up, the energy consumption goes up. That's interesting. So, are Bitcoins good, bad, or otherwise? This is the effect they have on the electrical generation industry and those who pay the price of the electrical generation industry having to be able to provide the electricity to keep these things running. So that's monthly consumption on the vertical axis, by the way. So that's in terawatt hours multiplied by 12 if you want the annual consumption. Pretty big numbers. The questions now we come to, you can see we're starting to scratch our head a little bit and say, gee, gosh, I wonder, are there some issues here that we need to talk about? I mean, we regulate farmers from like what they put on their crops and how many crops they grow, and we regulate the automobile industry, how they build their automobiles. We regulate the power industry. My goodness, we regulate a lot of whole different industries, but there is no regulation whatsoever for data centers, even though they can almost be compared with the utility network because they're providing storage and various things. And is it possible to provide more than you need or less than you need? Or things that you don't need? Wow, good questions. So let's see what Western resource advocates have to say about it. Okay. First of all, here are some potential policies that Western resource advocates put in their report, and you've got the full report indicated at the beginning of the presentation. Clean transition tariffs paid by data centers instead of utility customers. Okay. That's one thing that maybe ought to be part of a regulation process. Maybe there should be behind the meter clean resources, including generation and storage. Oh, behind the meter, on site, in other words. Maybe there should be certain requirements for that. It looks like a lot of batteries here in the picture, a lot of windmills in the picture. What about encourage load shifting? Yeah, we talked about that. Require energy efficiency best practices. Yeah, talked about that. That kind of makes sense. No particular rule here other than whatever might be in their local energy efficiency code, but maybe there could be a special code for data centers. They're kind of different from a grocery store. Maybe reform the resource planning and acquisitions on them. Maybe establish contract provisions to prevent cross subsidies. Ooh, some interesting stuff going on there. Yeah, I read about it in the newspaper recently. Follow best practices in rate making to protect customers. Gosh, okay, well, maybe sure. Send that to Public Service Commission, see what they say about it. Restructure economic development rates. Oh, yeah, we're going to build this special thing out west of the county here that's going to bring a lot of money in. Oh, yeah, and what's it going to do to my electric bill and my water bill? Well, maybe we need some requirements on water efficiency and reporting. So these are some of the things that the Western resource advocates are strongly suggesting need to be put into some kind of a regulatory format. And how can you argue that when we regulate everything? Or should we simply deregulate everything and just see what happens? We kind of tried that. We found out that doesn't really work that well. So maybe we need some kind of a reasonable balance. What's out there? Is there some legislation pending? And the answer is, yeah, there is some. And then look at this. This was a Republican Democrat agreed. Hey, we got to do something. This was back in October 2, 2025. And you know what? I don't know whether that bill passed or not. I think I remember hearing something about the moguls, these multi-billionaires in the AI business, visiting our country's leader and saying, we got to kill this bill. So you might want to look this up, see if the Artificial Intelligence Risk Evaluation Act passed. I should have done that myself. I meant to do that and I forgot. I'm going to do that after we hang up here. So now, this United States, of course, people are saying, well, you know, well, we can't do it because the Chinese aren't going to do it. And nobody else is going to do it. Well, you know, everybody else is saying the same thing. And if we all got together and had a reasonable meeting, we did it with nuclear. We've got the international nuclear regulatory group. So we've done it before. We, meaning the planet. So maybe, just maybe, if we weren't so pessimistic, we'd find these folks in China, because there are. I mean, you read about Chinese folks who say, we got to sit down and get together and then start regulating this stuff. And maybe there'll be some building codes and some electrical codes that we all as an engineer have to learn about when we're going to draw the plans for these things. Anyway, they highlight that there's a lot of opportunity with artificial intelligence, but you got to be careful as far as national security, public safety, economic competitiveness, civil liberty, on and on and on and on. It's just, we need to have a program to evaluate the various risks and benefits. So, thank you for enabling us to do this, because now this reminds me I needed to look up and find out what happened with this act. I'm pretty sure that it was that it went down the drain, but California passed one, and the United Kingdom is doing a lot of work. A whole lot of the people in in Parliament are now saying we got to regulate these folks. They've had some very unfortunate experiences in places like Ireland, where people lost water and electricity because of unreasonable amounts of electricity and water used by data centers that were supposed to be wonderful things for the communities. So this is also another dilemma that comes up when you start reading through stuff, is that artificial intelligence could be smart enough to be less likely to behave badly when it knows it's being tested. And Apollo Artificial Intelligence has said that. That's one of the concerns they have. So this is a company that makes this stuff. Says, good grief, this is dangerous stuff. Because some of the folks who, there's a test supposedly to see if this is going to be a good boy, but it's like if you have a dog or any other creature, if it knows how to behave, and then when you leave, it changes its mind and doesn't behave the way you think you taught it to, why should there's certain things that are missing in machines, like compassion and emotion and stuff like that. And speaking of, this is my local CVS pharmacy computer telling me to come pick up my prescription that I don't need. It's their AI system doing that. Fortunately, I can hang up real fast. So anyway, there's stuff going on out there. It's pretty interesting to watch. What is an adverse AI institute anyway? Well, it's an incident relating to an AI system involving a loss of control scenario, a risk of weaponization by adversaries, scheming behavior. Oh, who would ever do a thing like that? Threats to critical infrastructure, like utilities and stuff like that. Erosion of civil liberties. Oh my goodness, like spying on people. Economic competition, healthy labor markets. Okay, these are all adverse AI incidents. It'd be nice if we didn't have any of those from this fantastic thing that's out there. Maybe there's some reason we need to think about regulating. This is the ethics part of this course. I mean, ethics is really, really complicated because everybody's ethics and everybody's ideas are not necessarily all in line, but these are some of the things that can be thought about at least and need to be addressed. Probably should be. U.S. Green Building Council has got categories and leads for, platinum, gold, silver, and certified from way back 15, 25 years ago, where they were coming up, and they do have them for data centers. Data centers are pretty unique compared to a residential or manufacturing plant or almost everything else. But LEED does have their standards and they have their categories for data centers. So there are things that anybody who's involved with data centers might want to pay some attention to what LEED says about it. How do you classify artificial intelligence? Is it just either excellent or good or bad and ugly, nothing in between? Or might there be some shades of gray in between? Or might there be a whole lot of different shades of green, gray, purple, and orange in between? And, where do we draw the lines? This is stuff that takes some serious conversation. Some of us might become involved in that, but a lot of this is going to have to be done by the AI folks themselves and advising those who govern and so forth. But it's certainly something that's important to face up to. And, whether or not we provide the water and the electricity and the building structures for these folks, there are a whole lot of other things involved in this that we don't necessarily, how much ethical stuff do we worry about when we design a shopping center or a factory or a residence or whatever? But, wow, a whole lot more ethical stuff involved here. So, what fun. What a challenge. So here's some different codes. For example, consider it capable of limitations and implications of current and emerging technologies when part of their work. Civil engineer, okay, part of civil engineering code of ethics. So, we figure we're engineers, we have our codes of ethics, we follow our codes of ethics, and everything will be just hunky dory. All right, well, that's what civils have to say about it. Here's what the civils also have says: mitigate adverse society, environmental, economic effects. That's pretty important. Covers a lot of bases. Improve the understanding by individual and society of the capabilities in society, IEEE. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Yeah, and everybody says engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. I haven't read a single code of ethics in any of the societies, including this National Society of Professional Engineers, that says you don't hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Well, I think you can see here that there's a little implication that we may be dealing with safety, health, and welfare of the public with these things. We need to be careful with these designs, and we need to maybe get some involvement. Consider environmental impact and sustainable development and performance of all our professional duties. Essentially, every code of ethics has this now about environment and sustainable development. So yeah, this sort of fits into that category. So just in terms of engineering alone, we do have codes of ethics, unlike a few other professions in the world. And there even are AI ethics. Okay, pretty crucial. Here's my local university has this AI code of ethics sign posted on their sign on their AI door. Bias and fairness, ensuring all AI systems do not perpetuate or amplify biases, protecting individuals' data and ensuring its use responsibly, making AI decision-making processes understandable and accessible, establishing clear responsibility for AI actions and outcomes. Sounds pretty good. Yeah, we got the Bible, we got the Ten Commandments, we got all the laws of the land. We never break any of those either, do we? So nice to have the codes of ethics. They maybe give us some guidelines. But are we going to follow these things? What's going to happen? Pretty interesting stuff. So what are some of the specific questions we might want to leave with? Well, what if the data center is built that requires additional investment by utility to meet its needs? Who pays for it? What's the most ethical way to prevent supplying power to data centers from being subsidized by ratepayers? Who knows? How are we going to find out? All right, so here's some specific questions that really would be nice if we had some answers to these, and we don't necessarily have good answers. Fossil fuels to power AI, what's the true overall effect? Financial, environmental, and everything else. Is superhuman artificial intelligence dangerous or ethical? Do we have an answer? What about ChatGPT? Some good uses, probably. But how are we going to teach people when's the right time to use it and when's not? What about unauthorized collection of data for marketing purposes? Wow, I figure everybody knows exactly what color shirt I like to buy and what kind of food I like to buy because somehow that just gets out there. So lots of interesting ethical questions here. Will AI affect human creativity? Do we have a use it or lose it thing? I mean, I'm 82 years old, and I certainly recognize the use it or lose it. There's lots of formulas I used to know in physics that I haven't used for 50 years, and I don't remember what they are now. I have to look them up again. So, and what are humans going to do if everything we do is replaced by machines? I don't know. Maybe people get used to just sitting on the beach, but then how do we justify our existence? How do we pay for our existence? Who's going to pay for it? Good question. So You probably have a few other questions of your own, but you know, this is a few that come to mind for me and a lot of other people that all fit into the data center picture. So here's final statement about the future from the Berkeley study. And you can see I put in yellow, most notably, the recent rapid growth in accelerated servers has caused current total data center demand to more than double between 2017 and 23, So that's what Berkeley has to say about the energy demand. And it's the rest of their looking beyond 2028, then what? So that's the Berkeley final study after all the research they did. So there's a lot of unanswered questions is the bottom line. They answered a lot of questions, but they also discovered a lot of questions that still need to be asked. New York Times has an interesting opinion video on artificial intelligence if you want to click on it there. The question is, can we survive with AI or can we survive without it? So if you want to do a little more homework on it, you can read Yudkowsky's book, but remember, read the last chapter first. If you read this thing, it's quite an interesting read. It's almost worth canceling out your third favorite TV show, maybe even your most favorite TV show, or whatever else you do for play golf or whatever, to take a look at this thing. Pretty interesting. And this guy, he is an expert in AI, the author, and he is afraid. So that's what we got for the day, and we could go on and on and on with more of this ethics type stuff. There are a lot of groups that are organizing now to get people to write to their congressmen and so forth. So anyway, that is the end of the presentation. And let me just go back to slideshow here and go to the beginning and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Let me open up my participant box here and see if you any thoughts. Anybody want to add? We've got a few minutes here. How many minutes have we got? Yeah, we got about 3 minutes. Did you
I have
do anything today?
I have a comment and a question, if you have time. My comment is that power consumption of server racks it's increasing exponentially. You had showed using 8 GPUs, I think, for a server rack. And the current generation NVIDIA, I think it's the GB200, it's 72 GPUs and 36 CPUs. And by the end of the year, they're supposed to start selling the Vera Rubin, and that's going to have 144 GPUs. And so power consumption is going to go, I don't know, it's like 10 or 20 times higher than the conventional 8 GPU for their GB200s. And then it's going to be double that for the Vera Rubins. So it's an interesting thing to watch carefully to see about what the projected power requirements are going to be in data centers in the next few years. So that was my comment. And my question is I wondered if you knew anything about water cooling systems that are closed loop, because I was at a seminar last month where an electrical engineer who spent his career designing data centers said that those are a good type of water cooling system because they're closed loop and they don't lose water. And so, you know, they should be environmentally friendly. But I was also reading about a data center located in the state where I live that where the residents have been complaining the data center has a closed loop system, but they're complaining that it's consuming a lot more water than they projected.
Okay. Well, I happen to have on the roof above my head a water-cooled system called a cooling tower. And what happens with the cooling tower is, you run water through to cool off your electronics, but then what do you do with that water if it's going in a closed loop? You have to cool it off, right?
Right.
And run it through again and then cool it off again. And you cool it off in a cooling tower. How do you run the cooling tower? What runs that?
Electricity consuming a pump.
Electricity, of course, right. Now, what if, we know the latent heat of water and specific heat of water, how many calories per gram or BTUs per pound it takes, and so forth, to heat or cool it. We also know the latent heat of vaporization of water, which is also the latent heat of condensation of water. So if you want to cool the water faster, how do you cool it faster? 539 calories per gram. That's a lot of latent heat for vaporization, isn't it? So in other words, if that water can't be cooled with just plain old air blowing over it to cool it down, then you have to evaporate some of it. And if you evaporate it, then what are you going to do? How do you close that loop? Well, the way we close it on our building is we use city water to refill a cooling tower. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that answers your question. That water cooling is really nice, closed loop, sure, great, except for one thing. And when do you have the worst evaporation problem? It's on the hottest days of the year, when the hot air doesn't cool down as much as like a nice 30 degrees Fahrenheit Minnesota afternoon would cool down that water in a cooling tower pretty nicely. And it's so water cooled becomes kind of air cooled. But the other option is that water loop could be a geothermal loop where the water goes underground and gets cooled and then comes back up again. And that's a different story. And they are doing that in places as well, where they'll run if you dig down 20, 30 feet, you're down to somewhere in the mid 50s of temperature in a lot of places. And if you run water back and forth through that long enough, it'll cool down to where you can reuse it again without having any evaporate. So that's the next step from an air-cooled cooling tower, is to go down and run that stuff. Now, maybe you can also run a closed loop underwater if you're at Oceanside or something like that, or a big lake. You are going to warm up that lake a little bit. But then again, how's the lake going to cool? Well, that's natural evaporation. You don't pay for that, whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because people are spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to do it better.
Well, thank you for explaining that. I understand now.
Anyone else?
Yeah, in general, my overall question is, what about the systems that are using glycol closed loop systems? Is something that has been explored for this kind of data center technology?
Victor, I'm not sure about the glycol types. If they can use glycol and keep it in a closed loop system and not have to evaporate, just use air cooling to cool it adequately. Once again, there's a lot of experimentation going on, and I have to admit, I have not looked into that. I don't know the answer, but I can tell you that certainly if they find that it's cost effective, it's going to be a part of the system. There's a lot of interesting stuff like that, like even with photovoltaic systems for energy storage, we haven't talked about. We talked about batteries, but there are systems out west where they heat a liquid metal to temperatures in the neighborhood of 600 to 800 degrees Fahrenheit for underground storage, and then they use that at night. They bring it and let it boil water and run a conventional turbine to make electricity. So that's just another storage mechanism. It's mostly experimental, but there's some of those in operation, and they seem to be fairly effective. So we are in an era where innovation is going like crazy, and data centers is one place where it's happening, and it's requiring a whole lot of other innovation in a whole lot of other areas to be able to decide whether or not these things are going to be an integral and important and essential or whatever part of society in the years to come. And wow, I almost feel lucky to be only have a few years left, but I've got a great grandson. He's got a whole lot more years left, and I hope we do the right decisions. That's all my hope.
Interesting. And my final question I put on the chat is if when you were talking about legislation, do you see or there is, it might be changes taken by the NERC for extra power of the POI for data center? Anything that's going to be limiting the power connection or stability at the point of interconnection for the grid?
Well, you know, I think you say the NERC is North American Reliability Council or something like that. Yeah. We know they're thinking very seriously about how to fix it. I don't know. I have not. There's so much out there on this that with everything else I'm trying to keep up with, I've not been able to keep up to exactly what NERC is doing. But I'm hoping that all these various agencies are talking to each other so that we can come up with some coherent, concise, sensible set of regulations that will take into account proper needs of society. And, you know, what if we just give all of our energy to data centers and take it all away from people? Because if we got data centers that are that smart, we won't need people anyway, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, are we really headed that way? My God, I hope not.
I hope not. See. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying.
Anyone else? Okay, well, Mr. Host, I believe we're about done here. I see that we are at the 7 minutes past finish time. So I thank all of you for your interest in the topic. Talk it up, talk to your friends, see what they think. Read some of the material if it's of interest. Some of you are retired, and I'm sure you got a lot of other things you're interested in, but this has certainly become quite an interest to me. But I'm still working on PV plans, whatever we've got left, but this is something I'm going to be watching, and I do contact my legislators and I do contact my local people and try to at least give them my opinion, and they need to listen to what our opinions are. My opinion is that AI is neither all good nor all bad. It's got good and bad, and the thing about all the gray areas is the part that I see as the most logical definition of it. And we just have to somehow decide where we draw the line. And I think if we don't do that, I think we're going to see some serious consequences. Personal opinion, but that's what I've come up with based on what I've read. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, sir. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you
sir.
so much. I enjoyed the small audience.
That was very interesting. Thank you.
I did too. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Okay, looking forward to seeing you all up in Minnesota another week or so. Well, probably won't see you, but at least I'll feel your weather.
All right, enjoy.
Quick question for the host and moderators. How long after today do we have to complete the quiz? gone. Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm sure if you send him an email, then I don't think he's gone. Because he has to turn off the machine and end the program. So put it in the chat and you'll get an answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long you get to complete the quiz, but
Yeah, see
he'll
the note
answer.
in the
Put it
chat.
in the chat.
See the note in the chat, and you got the same thing in an email. It will tell you how to get it. Quiz is ready, but if you want to wait a little bit, but check the note in the chat, please.
Well, I see the note in the chat.
No.
What I don't, okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's a deadline on when. I think when you complete the quiz, then it gets graded, and if you pass it, then you get your credits.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think this is like a typical university course where they have to have the grades in by a certain date.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Very good.
Thanks again.
Signing out.